Hello. Welcome back. So, this morning we're going to talk a little bit about Anglo-Saxon language, Anglo-Saxon literature, Beowulf, and the Wanderer, the history of the English language, and how it affects us in a world literature class. So, starting out, a lot of times students think, well, in a world literature class we shouldn't be reading English. But the language of England from 410 AD to 1066 AD is entirely foreign to most readers these days. And so, as a language that needs translation, in some cases we deal with it in world literature. We know the specific area where the Anglo-Saxon language was used in England because two major events bookend this period. The first being the removal of the Roman troops in 410 AD. In 410 AD, the Roman Empire crumbles due to invasions from Gaul and other kingdoms, and England is left to its own devices to govern itself. In 1066, French King William, the Norman invasion, will attack England and take over England, and thus changing Old English into Middle English. The Norman invaders will put in laws that French has to be used at court in England, and thus the highly Germanic Old English language begins to transform into the very Francized Middle English that we see in the works of Chaucer and others. But for today, we're only talking about Old English, that English which is highly Germanized. Our language is originally German, and it comes from the settlers in England, the Angs, A-N-G, Angs, who spoke the language, Anglish. But it was highly influenced by wave after wave of Scandinavian invaders known as the Vikings. Back again. A few words about the culture that the language arises from, and the culture that Beowulf and the Wanderer and the other poems we're going to look at arise from. After the loss of Roman rule, England devolves into a violent society. So much so that a system was brought into play called Weregild. And the Weregild system is a good example of how dangerous this place could be. In the Weregild system, a person's life could be purchased, not in a slavery sort of way, but in a murderous sort of way. The idea being that if there was an enemy of your family or an enemy who you wanted to get rid of, someone you'd like to kill, well, for the right amount of money to the Lord, the Thane, T-H-A-N-E, you could, in fact, kill that person. A person's value would be determined by the Thane, and once that value was determined, if you killed them, you had to pay the price to the king, and you had nothing else to worry about. You paid for a life, you killed the person you were angry at, and you moved on. Think about how the world would be today if we could do that. And so, it led to a violent world, a violent society wherein people were killing and getting away with it. And when someone else killed someone in your family, well, clearly you would want revenge. And so you'd pay the price to have them killed, and then someone from their family, and so on and so forth. So there's a great deal of feuding. And people and entire families and entire clans got involved in these death feuds, these blood feuds over and over and over again to make for a society that was highly on edge, highly aggressive, highly murderous, and in many ways difficult to survive in. What you'll find with The Wanderer and Wolf and Edwacker, which we both read, or will be reading, is that they're stories of exile, banishment. And exile is a person who can no longer live where they were living. And so a great deal of the stories and poems deal with this exile idea. Violence occurs, you can't defend yourself, you have enemies, so you leave. In Wolf and Edwacker we see a female narrated poem, a poem that discusses what it's like to be the woman left when a man flees because his enemies are closing in on him, and how she suffers. The Wanderer is about a man who fought for a king, but his king died, his lord died, his thane died, and since he did not die with them, he has to wander the world because he lost his place. He was supposed to die with them. So banishment, exile, they become very, very important. And whenever we talk about exile, banishment as a theme in literature, of course we have to think of Adam and Eve and the biblical stories of exile, and how oft times when we think about those themes, exile, we think about the silence of God, the silence of the divine, that we are exiled, all of us, each of us as people are exiles, just like Adam and Eve are, from the Garden of Eden, from paradise, or from God's area of discussion, people he talks to. And so exile goes on to all of them. When you have a theme of exile, it goes on to all the largest themes. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? Is there a God? Why doesn't that being speak to us anymore? All of these sort of big ideas come down to us. And so when you read The Wanderer, when you read Woolf and Edwacker, those ideas should be coming in as well. The themes of the religious implication of banishment, the religious implication of exile. Hello again. So, when you're reading The Wanderer, or looking at The Wanderer, I'd like you to think of those themes. Themes of exile, themes of banishment, from both your place in society and from your place in heaven. And think about how the poet may have been trying to allude to both things. Beowulf, on the other hand, is a different thing altogether. Beowulf is considered the first English epic poem. It is from about 800 AD, and it is written in Anglo-Saxon, which is interesting in that it is set not in England, but in Northern Europe, in areas of Sweden and that sort of thing. And so for Beowulf to become the first English epic set not in England, it's an interesting way to look at the poem. Many of us have read Beowulf in high school or seen some of the terrible, terrible movies that are made about it. It's a very popular poem because there's dragons and swords and monsters and fighting, and there's some wonderful translations and renditions of it, and some not so good as well. So I will leave it to your own devices to know what the plot, setting, characters, and themes are of this piece. But again, looking at Beowulf as the outsider coming in, the man whom is coming to save a foreign group, and then when he returns in the final third of the poem, becomes king but has no heir and has to count on strangers and gives his life at the end. There's a great deal of theme going on with Beowulf, which I'd like to hear what you think is. So I guess that concludes our session on the Anglo-Saxons and their literature. The Anglo-Saxons have a diverse and interesting series of writings from this very, very short period, and I highly recommend you take a look at them. If you have any questions, as always, please email me or give me a buzz on the phone. Have a wonderful evening.